Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Grammy Winning Producer, Composer, and Arranger, the great Brent Fischer. He talked at length about his grand road in music and his latest project. It's a vision called Pictures at an Exhibition. It's another wonderful project of his. These days, he continues to carry on the legacy of his legendary father, Dr. Clare Fischer, and has continued to move seamlessly between the genres of jazz, pop, and symphonic. His arranging credits appear on more than 30 million albums from the likes of Usher, Michael Jackson, Elvis Costello and The Roots, D'Angelo, and more. He has a very fascinating story. Enjoy.
Hey, I'm a big fan of your work. It's a great pleasure to talk to you here at Neon Jazz.
I really thank you for being interested in it. That's, a man of your learning and the experience that you have. I'm honored and humbled. Thank you.
Well, you all are putting it out there, man. I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants. So it's a pleasure. And with your latest work, Pictures at an Exhibition, it's just another continuation of quality work that you put out. And it happens to come out during a time on the planet that's been very strange for a year and a half now. Does this feel like cathartic or comforting to have music out for people to listen to right now?
Well, I think that everybody is going to react in their own way. I know people who had a really bad year last year. I know people who had a great year last year. I know some guys that work at Zoom. They had a fantastic year.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, I was somewhere. I was somewhere in the middle. I had some time to reflect on things and maybe practice a little bit more. And so that was nice in a way, but this album also was put together with a lot of, let's say, pandemic-influenced Murphy's Law type situations where we had to, change recording studios because it wasn't large enough, and I wanted to seat the players so that I sat the horn players in a U setup, so nobody was actually blowing air right next to, right in the back of somebody's head or something like you usually have in a big band setup. And we did the same thing when we rehearsed. We did almost all of our rehearsals, every rehearsal for this album was outdoors. And that was fine. I did a couple of pandemic-friendly concerts last year that were outdoors, and we took great precautions to, observe all the guidelines. And the great thing is, after every rehearsal and every show, and then finally after the recording sessions, 2 or 3 weeks pass it, and I'm finding out that nobody caught anything. And so then I feel, okay, great. That's a sense of relief. I wasn't a contributing factor to somebody getting sick, So that was amazing, but yeah, the whole process of putting it together was changed a little bit. Even in the we've got a making of video on YouTube, actually quite a few of them now that show different snippets of how we put this whole project together, and that's the one thing you can see quite often is a lot of them shot outdoors.
Yeah, well, and one thing too about this album is that now things are starting to reemerge and opening up, live shows. So, you said last year was kind of half and half. When you really dig into the reflection that you went through last year, what did you learn about yourself that maybe you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger now as the live world kind of opens up a little bit more? And hopefully we're on the other side of this pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that too much. I would say, I stopped doing a lot of touring and live performing about 10 years ago when I made a conscious decision that I'm going to spend more time working as a writer, composer, arranger, producer, which means I would be in studios sometimes, but actually spending a lot of time at home. And so because that has kind of been my lifestyle for a good 10 years now, I don't know that it changed that much for me. That it's just, all the live stuff was canceled, and we figured out ways to do. Like I said, we did a few outdoor performances here and there. I helped set up some Zoom performances for individuals, kind of curate some performances so that we could have some work for people that weren't in my same situation, that were, gigging musicians. That was pretty much their only source of income. And I had a chance to teach more people remotely. So, I did a lot of Zoom lessons for people, including on the other side of the world. And for me, that was a great experience, sort of being able to share the music, analyze it, and then help these other composer arrangers or, improvisers, all the people that I spoke with during this time. That was just a phenomenal experience. However, I just recently did a seminar at my alma mater, Cal State Northridge, here in Los Angeles. That was nice to be back in front of people again. And I also just did my first indoor, we did our album release concert at an indoor venue here in LA. And that was nice. It was good to be back indoors.
It's so wonderful on this end of things to hear that this is happening. There was such a long chasm of nothing, and musicians just really wanting to get back out there. So it's really great to hear all this. When we go back in your lineage, obviously we know who your famous father was, and talking about standing on the shoulders of giants, millions of people in the world have been inspired by his work. But growing up in that house, was it always a foregone conclusion that you were going to be a jazz musician? Was this just a part of your world all the time?
Let me, that's a great question. Let me shift it around to you. What was your, to get me started, what was your first memory of being touched by music? Your earliest, when you were a small child. Do you remember what that was, or was it just sort of something that grew on you? How did you find out? Was it on TV, listening to the radio, heard a live band?
I was born in 72, so for some reason I remember Mellow Yellow. And I don't know if my mom sang it to me. I don't know what the circumstances were. Right. They call me Mellow Yellow. I mean, I just remember that reverberating like an echo through my sound chamber. So, yeah, that's
right. Yeah, so I mean, that, I have sort of, something similar, but what it was for me, my earliest memories are of lying underneath my dad's grand piano with our family dog, and just listening to him as a small child, just listening to him. He was practicing or writing, doing exercises, preparing for a session, whatever that was. That was, so in a sense, I was doing that. I was listening to Clare Fischer play the piano, and understanding, starting to pick up on what was going on there before I had even learned to speak. So I would say, in a sense, it's like music is like my first language. Now, because of that environment that I grew up in, he never forced me to play anything, but he saw that I was interested. He saw that I liked watching him play the piano and listen to it. And as soon as he knew that I understood that when you're in a recording studio and the red light goes on, that means don't make a sound, he started bringing me to sessions with him. So I was about 5 or 6 years old at that point, and I had already, sort of lined up my Tinker Toy boxes at home and taken the Tinker Toys and beat on them. But then, he saw when he took me into the recording studios that I would always sort of gravitate towards sitting near the drummer and watching the drummer play. And I had some great drummers to watch. I remember specifically John Guerin, Larry Bunker, and Harvey Mason Sr. Wow. Those were the guys that I remember watching a lot of when we'd go and, doing whatever, albums, TV commercials, TV shows, movie dates, all that stuff. And then as I grew up, so he got me a drum set when I was 5 or 6, and I fooled around on that for a little while, and I became a good drummer. At 14, I was missing having pitch and harmony. So then I took up electric bass, and also was, fooling around on the keyboards, but electric bass became something really fascinating for me. And then I still went to California State University at Northridge as a percussion major. I got a percussion degree. That's symphony percussion, so I learned how to play timpani and vibraphone, marimba, and the vibraphone and marimba work carried over into all the jazz stuff that I was doing, and so I started playing vibes and marimba on my dad's albums in the early '80s, and then he put me to work. He saw my bass skills just sort of mushroom out at the same time as his bass player in his well-known group Clare Fischer and Salsa Picante, later became Clare Fischer Latin Jazz Group. He saw my abilities expanding at the same time as his bass player was leaving, and so it was a good fit that he would put me in the band, not just because I had the skill level to deal with it, but because I was his son, and I was probably about 115 pounds, and he was 220 pounds of solid muscle. He could tell me exactly what he wanted me to do, and I would play it without question. So and he was very tough on me, because I was here I was in the band. The percussionist, the conga player is Pancho Sanchez. The drummer is either Alex Acuna, Pete Riso, or Walfredo Reyes. And there were lots of other guys too, but those were the big ones. And then the timbalero was Luis Conte. We had either Rick Zuniger or Danny Embry on guitar, either Gary Foster or Dick Mitchell on woodwinds. And so, all of these guys were at least twice my age when I started out. And but they helped me a lot because they saw that I was able to handle it. So they were constantly giving me pointers and stuff like that. And then again, my dad was very tough on me. He did not let me make any mistakes or slack off with anything, or not be prepared. Some of the guys thought he should have probably taken it a little more easy on me, but I think I'm a better musician for having gone through that. It's just like the regular tough band leader type of situation where you got to really bring your A game each time. And so that was a great experience. And then we, all of a sudden I realized, well, hey, I'm in high school and I'm playing with these great bands. We're starting to make, he's starting to use me on albums. I didn't even go to career fair. All of my dad's friends were musicians. That was my whole environment growing up. So by the time that I found out that there were actually careers besides just growing up and becoming a musician, well, it was too late. I was already in the industry and I was already working, and the rest is history. We went on to work together for 32 years, and even though we always had, our separate things that we were doing, we did a lot of projects together, and I ended up being his assistant for a lot of the string arrangements that he did for pop and jazz artists, from Prince to Diane Shore to, whatever, all of Robert Palmer, all these different artists that we were working with over the years. Then I became his co-writer. And as he saw my abilities as a writer expanding, then eventually I've become his ghostwriter when he became too busy sometimes, or there was a quick turnaround on projects. But we did it a little differently than, the usual ghostwriter thing. We actually told the record companies or whoever the client was, that I had done it. And so that's how I kind of worked my way into not only continuing with this type of a career, writing music and arranging for various artists in multiple genres, but also this whole idea that to carry on the legacy. I like what my father did so much. I agreed with so much of his music philosophy. It wasn't like I decided, well, I'm just going to do the exact same thing. I know people that listen to what I write can hear that there is a difference, but at the same time, you can totally tell where the inspiration comes from. And I've said at his memorial service and many times since then that his greatest gift to me was the 4,000 some pages of score, the score pages that I have here for all the different arrangements. Some were unfortunately lost, in the shuffle of just being very busy during the 60s and 70s. By the 90s, I started realizing as I was, becoming a young adult that I need to make sure we preserve everything. But those scores, I can look at them for inspiration, and it doesn't matter if I'm writing a a string arrangement for an R&B artist, and I look at a piece that he wrote for his Latin jazz group, just because there's something in there that reminds me when I'm thinking of ideas for this string arrangement. There's something that reminds me of that old tune that we played together years ago, and I'll go and study it and gain inspiration from it. So this was an amazing experience that I was just sort of thrust into, and it all worked out well for 32 years, us working together. And now he handed over directorship of the Clare Fischer ensembles to me gradually starting around 2003, 2004. And since then, I've kept them all going. The big band, the Clare Fischer Clarinet Choir, the jazz corps group, the Latin jazz group with all the vocalists. We still have some of the original vocalists in the group. And then I find new players, and I make sure we keep up the Fischer sound. Let's say there's a certain way of working with the band, and I'm sure you can see by the people that I use. I mean, these are guys that are the cream of the crop that have been on a lot of people's albums. But every artist has their own way that they like to work with musicians, and so the way that I have done it, which is based on the way my father did it, is I like to think of it as a type of a Fischer sound that I am carrying on in a second generation way.
That's beautiful. You mentioned one person during that time that really stood out to me. He's a veteran I've heard about for years and years, and I actually am fortunate enough to see him on a regular basis, and that's the great Danny Embry here in Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah,
does he live there now?
Yeah, he's here, and everybody talks about this history and lore, and I'm like, I'd love to hear somebody mention something, and when you said that, I was like, there it is. And he's wonderful. He's in a group called Guitar Elation, and he's in a couple other incarnations, but he's just wonderful. I mean, he's a beast on the guitar.
Yeah, and I'm pleased. Well, please send him my best. We enjoyed working with him so much. He was the one guitarist, I would say, that my dad worked with that could actually he would accept the way my father wanted to write for guitar, which was to conceive of it as an ensemble instrument rather than a rhythm instrument. So in other words, when my dad wrote for guitar, it was like he was writing for another horn or a violin player or something like that. So the guitars had parts, even if the parts had chords in them and stuff like that. There were very few of my dad's guitar charts that actually had chord symbols where he expected the guitar player to be comping chords at the same time as he was, because, my dad's sense of harmony and all the shifting chromaticism that was going on there, but while it's still a very, very tonal music, you can't have two guys that are that complex happening at the same time. And so when we'd play live, there would be times that actually Danny would, just lay out while my dad would comp, and then maybe my dad would rest for a couple of choruses while, rhythm player was soloing or a woodwind player, and then let Danny take over the comping. And he was the one guy that was, let's say, humble enough that would accept this arrangement and didn't want to be one of those guys that, wanted to be playing all the time. They had to be playing every bar. And that was a perfect pairing for my dad with Danny Embry. Yeah, so that was
wonderful. That's cool. So before we depart your younger years, childhood, so to speak, you were around musicians all the time, and I'm sure there was a long period where you just weren't even cognizant of star power. What was the first musician that you got around that you really saw, you got bespeckled by their famousness, or you were just like, wow, this is so-and-so?
Well, for me, it was more about the, I would say to me, somebody was famous in my mind as a child if they were a really phenomenal musician. So, for instance, my dad and I started listening to Return to Forever at the same time. And to me, that was, just listening to what each of the players were doing and then I was interested enough in all the different genres that I was listening to. I grew up with a lot of rock music too, and occasionally I would find a rock band that I liked that my dad would also enjoy listening to. Maybe not his first choice for listening to, but there were progressive rock groups like Gentle Giant, or the work that Bill Bruford did with either Alan Holdsworth and Jeff Berlin, or Alan Holdsworth and John Wetton. And so to me, those guys were famous. And when I went to see their concerts as a teenager, I wasn't thinking about the fact that, we're in a 800 seat venue as opposed to a 20,000 seat venue. That was how I was thinking about it. Those are famous people. And I think because I was around celebrities, I wasn't as, let's say, starstruck by that, because my cousin Andre Fischer, he was one of the founders of Rufus, and so we went to go see Rufus and Chaka Khan open for Stevie Wonder one time I think it was either at the Forum or the Sports Arena here in LA. So that was a huge event. I think we were first or second row. Here I am as 10 or 11-year-old kid, and then I got to go backstage, and so for me that was just part of a normal part of life. For me, hanging out with somebody like Cal Tjader or Pancho Sanchez was, these are friends of my dad. I didn't think of them as let's say the way that other people did, and I think that worked to my advantage later on, because when I started being in the studio where there would be a lot of celebrities around, I wasn't one of those guys that was nervous and kind of shaking, and I had a job to do in there. Either I was assisting my dad, maybe I was contracting the orchestra, so I was managing the session, maybe I was a session coordinator, and sometimes later on he asked me to conduct, so he could go in the control room and listen. So I was assistant conductor, and I had lots of stuff to do, and it just wasn't an issue to me. And I think celebrities like that of people that they're working with. They don't want the guys that they're paying money to do something for them to start geeking out, let's say. So I don't have a big memory like that of being I remember being interested in the energy that's sort of created when you see a really good group playing in a large arena like that. So I think that's Stevie Wonder probably is one of my, earliest memories of just being sort of very interested in how the whole thing works when you put on a show like that for that many people all at once. And I guess, these are acts that might be considered in some circles to actually be jazz related, by today's standard. Not everything that Stevie Wonder did, but certainly much of it. And I think that's because there's just this relationship between jazz, R&B, and gospel music, sharing these rich harmonies that sort of grew out of the Romantic era. It's so interesting that because of the jazz connection, my dad and I have ended up doing more orchestral arrangements for R&B artists. I mean, outside of jazz. The other big genre is R&B, a little bit of work for gospel artists, and then not as much for just like, let's say, straight-ahead pop artists. And I guess it's probably because of the willingness of people in R&B and gospel to accept these thicker jazz harmonies and this whole idea of, contrapuntal writing. That is, it's kind of becoming a lost art. I would say that's one thing that I'm still waiting for people to pick up on is the idea of using counterpoints, going back to the original improviser, J.S. Bach. What was that, 400 years ago or something?
Yeah.
Imagine being there and watching him take a single melody and improvise a 4-part fugue out of it, like a canonic fugue or something like that. And all of that was improvised, and it was only later on, after he'd improvised something, that he would write it all down, and he could write it as fast as he could play it because it was all just being put together spontaneously in his head, and that's an amazing thing. But yeah, so this is, to make a short story long, that's, I think, how I have viewed my, sort of my relationship with celebrities as let's say a behind the scenes guy, but somebody who occasionally comes up, and I have no fear of stage, like stage fright feeling or anything like that. So to go up and be the MC for a show is fine with me, and that's it's just never anything that I have worried about to sort of psych myself into going on stage and doing a good job. That was just sort of always there because I just watched everybody else always do it. It's time to play. Okay, well let's go play.
It's interesting about you're talking about the cross-pollinating of genres. I went down here in Kansas City to the American Jazz Museum, and they have a new exhibit based on the Disney movie called The Soul of Jazz, and they kind of go through each city, like what the influence LA and New York and New Orleans and Kansas City, and all these cradles of jazz and how they influenced what was going on. And I remember them saying how LA was instrumental because of the movie and TV industry, and how all of these pieces, elements of jazz that people aren't, thinking definitively about, but are really kind of the backbone of a lot of things that were going on. And it was cool because at the same time, they have a jazz academy here in town, and the students were out there playing. So it's like there was all of these things happening all at once while I was thinking about how all of these things kind of work together in one big machine. So it's interesting how you verbally orchestrated that, and I was thinking how those things played in. And, you have a lot of arranging credits that go onto a lot of albums from Elvis Costello and Michael Jackson and all these other artists. What album that you were a part of surprised you the most because it took off and really got into the favor of the public hugely?
Well, there have been a few. I mean, first of all, I would say going back all the way to 1980, the first album I ever made with my dad, that was the first album where he decided to bring vocalists into, the Latin jazz group setting. And so that Clare Fischer and Salsa Picante Present 2+2 album won a Grammy in 1981. So that was a pretty good way to start my career. And then we won another Grammy in 1987, I believe, for another vocal album. So that was something we were really happy about having. We were surprised by the longevity of Prince. And, for a time there, Robert Palmer was doing really well for quite a few years there. So there was that. I was surprised by, you never know when you make an album. You just do your best, and you never know how it's going to reverberate with people. Like, for instance, the album that I did with Elvis Costello, that was with him and the Roots, and then my orchestral arrangements. So you put the three together. We did one performance on the Jalen show, and then I think Costello and the Roots did a few other performances, but basically they were both busy with their careers. The band was on the TV show plus their other gigs, and then Costello had his own touring dates, so they were unable to do a tour for that album to support it. And so it didn't get a lot of notice. Not what I was expecting. And then on the other hand, this D'Angelo album that I worked on, Black Messiah, that was released in late 2014 and won a couple of Grammys in 2016. That was, that was something that people had been waiting for about 15 years. It took about 15 or 16 years to put that whole album together. And so I think that was, something that it's kind of my calling card now, at least for right now, until the next one comes along. A lot of people know of me because of that. But then again, there are other people who know of me as, the guy who has directed all these Grammy-winning albums from the Clare Fischer Big Band or the Clare Fischer Orchestra, Clare Fischer Latin Jazz Band. Each one of those has been, we've always been really happy when an album does well, and when it doesn't, I think I'm not so worried about that because we're not writing this music to be current. This has no attachment to necessarily the times that we're in right now. The idea is to make the music relevant for the state of the art today, but timeless in a sense that we hope that people will keep on listening to this music years from now, and they do. We get people ordering CDs that we released in the late '90s or whenever, and every once in a while, somebody discovers it and they find out about what we're doing and order a bunch of CDs or some of the LPs that we still have. I don't have that many left, but we do have some vinyl. And so collectors are ordering that, and it's because they may have just heard a Clare Fischer album from the '60s, and it just it went unnoticed because maybe it got some good reviews or whatever, but something else big was happening that year. Something else really big was happening that year that just commanded everybody's attention. So the idea that I don't want to make a hit record. I want to make an album that is timeless, that people will be able to enjoy listening to just as much 30 or 40 years from now as they do today. And so in that sense, I'm always an eternal optimist. Glass is always 2/3 full type of guy about all the different recordings that we've done because I'm proud of them. I don't go back and listen to any of them and think to myself, oh yeah, it's sort of embarrassing or something like that. We don't have that sense because my dad was always sure of himself when he went into the studios. There was no fishing around at the session, trying to find the sound or trying to create that special magic or whatever. He knew what he wanted to do when he went into the studio and how to get what he wanted out of the players. And I've taken that attitude myself. When I go into the studio, we can record very quickly and efficiently with great emotion and feeling too. We did the entire Pictures at an Exhibition big band album in a single day of recording. And I basically had to do it that way, first of all, because of a lot of the pandemic restrictions that were in place had forced us back in our timetable, and so in order to get the album out by a certain date, we had to record quickly and also mix fairly quickly. We had a few weeks to mix and then mastered also very quickly, and it was okay because we have a good system set up. Everybody knows what the division of labor is all understood, and so when we go into something, it's it sounds kind of clinical and scientific the way I'm describing it here, but there's also a great amount of emotion and feeling that goes into it. And when we listen back to a take, I make sure that is one of the things that is there, a heartfelt performance. And I think because we did record quickly and we didn't make too many takes, we have that captured. I was going to say on tape, but that's I don't know what we use. It's in the ones and the zeros of the hard drive now. So so the feeling is definitely there, and we never had to take so many takes that it became technically perfect but artistically lifeless at that, because you're just so many times going through the same material. The law of diminishing returns starts invading the whole aesthetic process at that point. This was all. I'm really happy with the way everything came out, and now I know if we have to do another album during a similar type of unusual times, I'll figure out a way to adapt and adjust.
Wonderful. You've been fortunate over your career, obviously, to have done quite a bit yourself and be around quite a bit. So when you are around younger players and you have that opportunity to teach them and to give them really, good nuggets of wisdom about being a musician or being in the industry, what do you really try to key in on? What do you want them to get from what you know and what you can teach them?
Well, the first thing that I'm looking for when I have a student that is an arranger composer is to pass along the sort of these unique ways of looking at music that were first conceptualized by my father, whereby his influences weren't just, let's say, Duke Ellington, Lenny Tristano, Billy Strayhorn. Those are three huge influences on him, but there was an equal influence from Shostakovich, Stravinsky, Bartok, Charles Ives, and all these, Alban Berg, all these great symphonic composers. And then when you add to that, I've had influence from listening to people like Alan Holdsworth and Jeff Berlin and Steve Kahn, and I will use inspiration from things that I've heard them do and fit it to, again, the type of stuff that I'm working on, whether it's a bluesy ballad like we have on this Pictures at an Exhibition piece, or, kind of we have rock funk in there, some Brazilian tinged, some of the movements, also just everything that we're doing in the bebop world. All of those elements come together into sort of this fusion, and not like, I'm not talking, I use the word fusion in, let's say, an intermingling. A good friend of mine, fantastic vocalist out here in Los Angeles, Sam Booker, she coined the term transgenre. And I like that idea where you are sort of blending genres. And of course, there is one overarching, obviously I've made a big band album. It's firmly in the jazz category. The framework of the album is jazz, but there are elements of Latin, symphonic, rock, funk, and things like that are mixed in there. So these are these types of ideas that I'm trying to get across to students that are arrangers, composers, and guys that are doing music writing. But for the other students, the people that are players, I'm always looking for the next generation of great musicians coming out of universities all across the U.S., Canada, and some of them from music conservatories in Europe. We've had people play in my big band who are European, and then also many colleges around the United States. And I try and keep in touch with some of the colleges. It's not always easy because you never know where the next great player is coming from. I think enough people know by now that I'm interested in doing that. I've got people in my band that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and some in their 70s. We used to have a guy in his 80s in there. Unfortunately, he had to retire. But it's great to have that. The older guys sort of impart their wisdom and experience to the younger guys who might not have gotten that had they been just playing with players their own age. And then in return, the younger players impart that youthful vitality, and it becomes infectious, and it rubs off on the older experienced players to sort of bring up their game. And when we need something to be aggressive and hard driving, then they find the energy within themselves, find that youthful energy again to do that. And so that's what I'm looking for in players, when I'm searching out the next great generation of musicians, because I want this to continue beyond me. There will be somebody one day that I hope to hand over the directorship of all of these bands, not only that I inherited from my father, but the projects that I've put together myself, and to be able to play this music 50 or 70 years from now, sort of like has been done with. I'm sure everybody has varying degrees of things they like or things they don't like about how different, let's say, some legacy big bands are from the way the original director had the band sounding, whatever, 70 or 80 years ago. And that's always a risk you take. It's always, things are always going to change depending on the type of musicians that you have in there. And so what my goal is to just make sure that I don't just get anybody in this band because other people tell me, oh yeah, that's a great player. I want to make sure it's a great player that thinks similarly or has similar conceptual paradigms for, how we look at music and how the art is created and what serves the music best, right? That's for me the overarching goal of everything is what serves the music best, really.
You get to wake up every day and create music, whether you're, performing, conducting, arranging. What do you like the best about this process of being a professional musician, of making music?
I need to have the plumber come over right now. I've got to take my car in some tires, and there are still those all the life things that need to go on. So it's not just all day every day. That would be really nice. But, there are all sorts of other things that take place. But yes, I do. I think another friend of mine said it best. He's also he's not a musician, but he's self-employed, freelancer like I am. And he said, it's like I'm on vacation and I'm also working 24/7. So in other words, if there's a day where maybe the big project is finished, then you can take a break or whatever. It doesn't matter if that day is Tuesday or Wednesday, because I don't have, aside from meetings or a recording session or something that has a, definite time where I have to be in a certain place, then my time is my own. On the other hand, that vacation time, so to speak, can be interrupted at any moment by a call saying, we needed 3 string arrangements yesterday. How soon can you give them to us? The Michael Jackson thing that I did was, that was a 72-hour turnaround. I got the music on a Saturday night, and Tuesday evening, I was standing in front of a 45-piece orchestra that I had written for, and only gotten about 10 hours sleep that whole weekend over those 3 days. And just got it done. And that's what you need to do. So that was, there was no clocking out at that point. This had to be finished. The recording session was set. They had other deadlines, that were much more important than me, getting this piece finished. And so I had to conform to their setup. And so that's always a situation. And I know guys that do that, they'll and I did this for many, many years when I was touring. Now I just do a little bit, but it's still the same thing. You fly somewhere on the other side of the world, you sleep for a little bit, then you get up, you go to a sound check, you do a concert, you might have to turn around and fly straight back. And once you get back to LA after, a 20-hour trip or something like that, you take a 2-hour nap, get up and go somewhere and play music. So it's all of those things. So I love the idea that nothing is ever the same. And I also love the idea that between all of the different ethnic styles that I've been honored to take part in over the years, besides, all the American music I'm doing, I can honestly say there's no song that I've ever played in my life that I've, just sort of really gotten tired of. And I think that was part of what was happening when I was, when I was getting educated, when I was getting my degree and all the stuff that I was looking at to learn what my father was doing. Not in the sense that I took lessons from my dad ever. It's just, we were on sessions and we'd be talking about stuff. He said, did you notice how I did this here and how I wrote for that instrument? And then I'd look at it, or I'd ask them questions. What were you thinking when you did this? And we'd get into this great discussion about, trumpet mutes or something like that. And so all that was going on concurrently because I was either playing, percussion in a symphony orchestra or electric bass on a gig. Those instruments don't quite require as much concentration as, let's say, the second alto player in a big band or the or the first violist in an orchestra. Those guys really have to concentrate on what they're doing to blend with their section. They're not listening as much to what's going on with the, with the trumpets or the clarinets than as I would get a chance to do. And so I just had a chance to absorb all this stuff. And that's part of what happened with Pictures at an Exhibition, is, performing with an orchestra when I was in college, and there just wasn't a lot to do back in the percussion section, so I got to listen and absorb everything. And then the same with my dad's group. All those years that, I had all my bass parts pretty much memorized. I really didn't need to put a lot of written music in front of myself. Now, as an older man, I do need to put the charts in front of me and read along, just to make sure I, still remembering what I maybe haven't played, a song maybe I haven't played in a few years. But I was all playing from memory when I was a younger man, and so I got a chance to just play bass and listen to what everybody else was doing, and I could study the interactions between the drums and percussion, or the interactions between the voice and the keyboard and the woodwind parts, and so these are great positions to be in. When I think about what it takes to be a band leader, and I'm surprised there aren't more bass player band directors. I always have said, keyboard players usually are the band directors when you see a lot of different touring acts, but they have their hands full, literally. They have their hands on the keyboard, so they have to conduct sometimes with their head or nod something, and I can play bass with one hand for a few bars, just press my fingers against the frets and it'll still make sound. So I've got my right hand to be able to cue people in, or conduct a rubato section, or to whatever it needs, cut off the band all on the same time. So in that respect, I'm really happy with the instruments that I chose at that young age. When I don't know why I gravitated to those instruments, but I did, and I think it's worked out very well. And they're easy to practice and maintain. The hardest part is just that I'm not actually a piano player. I play enough piano to be able to write at the keyboard, but then, when something is complicated, I can't play it very fast at the keyboard. I just sort of have to imagine it in my head. And then that's also another great, thing that good be able to do, is to imagine the music in your head, so that when you finally hear it live after you've been writing it, that it sounds the same way in person as it did when you were conceiving it inside your brain.
So everything's going to come down to this. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans. But ultimately, you live your life. You have a perception of who you are. Who do you think you are?
That's a great question. I think the one thing that drives me every day is I have so much music that I still want to create, even after all these years. Not only do I have ideas for original compositions for my head, inside my head, that have yet to be put down on paper, and then I have ideas for arrangements that I'd like to do of other people's music. But I've got also a long list here of Clare Fischer tunes that he wrote maybe for his trio, or in some other small group setting, that I really would like to arrange now for a larger ensemble, either the clarinet choir, big band, rhythm section and strings, something like that, and maybe do a Music of Clare Fischer series. And that's where we look to the fans to really help us out. There is a donate there is a donate button on clarefischer.com down at the bottom of the home page, and that money goes straight into the Clare Fischer Memorial Recording Fund and helps us to put out more albums like this. And then when I think of something more for myself, I'll make another album for myself at some point. So that's really how I think of myself, besides all the other things that I do in my life that I'm interested in, which are essentially, I love traveling. I've been all around the planet, all 7 continents. I've been to Antarctica. I've been to almost 80 countries. I love the interactions of different cultures, and to be able to do business as a musician when I'm going to work for somebody in a foreign country and see how, even though there are good people, bad people, really organized people, really disorganized people, you can find all of those in any country you go to. But to find out kind of how the culture works, how the business is set up, all those different places. So these are other things that I'm interested outside of music. And as a matter of fact, the pictures that you see in my Pictures at an Exhibition album, part of what I did with this album to encourage people to actually purchase the physical CD as opposed to just streaming it. And of course, CD players are still cheap. If your old one stopped working, they're relatively inexpensive right now. So, in order to sort of get people to consider buying CDs, I made sure first of all, we have bonus tracks on this album, stuff that you can't get on streaming. They're not just alternate mixes. I took not extra. Let's say I have 2 versions of the same movement in 3 different places, and the rhythm section parts, which are essentially improvised, are completely different, and the solos are different. The ensemble parts are the same or similar, but the solos are completely different. So in that way, I could have 6 or 7 people take a solo on one song without it being more than 5 or 6 minutes in length, because you can hear the other version, not an alternate version. It's not a sequel; it's an equal. Just like the saying goes. And so that's one thing that I did. The other thing was to put a large booklet in the album that explains, exactly what the processes were that we went through to make this whole album. And then I've curated my own Pictures at an Exhibition exhibit right there in the booklet. Some of them are the photos of all the sessions and rehearsals that we did. So, like I said, plenty of outdoor pictures, pandemic friendly pictures. And then I have pictures that I have taken myself from around the world. And I've got pictures from, I believe, every continent. If I missed a continent, I apologize, because I just kind of went with what I felt were the best pictures that I had taken over the years in my travels. And we have a game where you can actually look at the pictures and try and guess where they are, and go to the back of the booklet, and answers are in the back. So you can test your knowledge of, let's say, geography and geology. I don't have that many urban areas in the photographs. It's mostly natural scenery. I guess, again, to make a short story long, that's essentially how I think of myself. I have my interests, and I love what I do. I love working with so many different people, and the fact that it becomes a different project, and then when people like my work, they come back and we get to do something else again. And even though it's with the same people, again, it's we're dealing with different music, maybe even a different style. So these are the great things that I've been able to do, and what is important to me is to make great music, and I got that gift from my father.
Final question, actually, I have, and it's this. Because we're going through this pandemic and we're kind of waking up and coming out of it, you've talked about that energy you felt at the Stevie Wonder show, and there is that magic in live environments. What do you hope we all collectively realize about the power of live music once we get back to it in earnest?
I would say this has been another, now that you remind me, another goal in my life to make people think about the idea that that's fine to listen to music sometimes as a background, just sort of background distraction. It's there, it's soothing in the background while you're concentrating on something, while you're working, whatever, or you're having a party. Some people go to festivals basically to party, and the bands that are playing on stage they're just kind of like a distraction. The main thing is to hang out with their friends and have a good time, and that's fine. That's one way to enjoy music. But even if you're not a trained musician and you can't, for instance, hear the types of things I hear, I usually make this analogy that shows, let's say, an idea of how hearing is, one of the lesser developed senses, let's say out of all the five senses. Let's say you walk into a restaurant and you can smell the food. You can figure out by the smells you're smelling what's cooking. And then when you finally get your food and you taste it, you get all these tactile confirmations, the texture of the food when you are cutting it and putting it in your mouth, and then again the flavors, the smells, all these things you are seeing, touching, tasting, and smelling. But the music that's playing in the background, in the restaurant, are you, for instance, aware that the drummer is playing in 4/4, that the chord that's playing right now is a B flat major 9, that the singer is singing a D, the horn players are playing an F and a G? Are you aware of that? That's going on, and do you have that ability? And for the people that do, this is kind of a blessing and a curse. It's like when I walk into a mall and I hear the main mall music is in A flat, let's say, and as I'm walking by a specific store, they're playing something that's in A, and I'm and there are different tempos, and my brain starts trying to analyze, okay, how do these two musics coincide with each other? And I've learned how to push that tendency I have to the back so that I can just not let it bother me anymore. But even for those people that don't have this ability to be able to do this, there are incredible emotional depths that you can find in all directions. I can't tell you how many people have told me, Brent, thank you so much. I just want to let you know that either they'll say your music has brought me so much joy in my life, or they'll say something like, your music really got me through a tough time in my life, and to be able to listen to it sort of helped me go beyond or do what I needed to do to get to the next phase of my life. I just I wonder if this more music in hospitals for people to listen to is going to help people have that sense of I can draw energy from this to battle the cancer or whatever whatever that person has to battle when they're in the hospital. So these are all these types of things that I hope that people will realize, especially when you go to hear live music, the difference in the sound. The difference in the sound from when you're listening to it. And there's a difference when you are listening to an LP or a CD on a nice stereo system in your home or your car as compared to putting little earbuds in and listening to, streaming music is like, it's like the audio equivalent of looking at a grainy old black and white newspaper photo. It's just not the same as when you see something that's real life, high resolution, 3D, all of those great things that we like visually. Now, I hope people will wake up to the idea that your life can be enhanced by doing this in the audio sense as well. And so that would be, for me, a wonderful thing to see people realize, hey, this is so much better when it's live, right? And I'm standing. Actually, that's how I open my liner notes. It's nothing better than hearing live music, especially when you're standing right there with the band, and you're surrounded by them, or you're right in front of them, or you're wherever you are, that you're near them, that you can hear what's going on. And for me to also watch people play and to see what they're doing with their instruments and how they're, how they're manifesting their skills in real time. So these are all great things that I hope people will come away with. Yeah, it's nice to watch somebody perform on Zoom, but it's so much better when you go see them live, right?
I agree. 100% agree. Beautiful. Brent, thank you for taking some time out today, man. This has been wonderful. I appreciate it.
You are quite welcome, sir. Thank you very much for having this great conversation with me. I love it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in LA, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Brent for his time, energy, and all of that wonderful music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.